Hello and welcome to the RC Industry Podcast, episode 15. For those of you new to the show, this is the podcast where I interview influential people from the worlds of stand-up, comedy, radio, TV, and today, the Brighton Fringe. We've got Julian Caddy, who is the managing director at the Brighton Fringe. He has worked there for nearly 4 years. He's also run venues in Edinburgh, had a little bit of a performance past as an actor. We talked about what are the main advantages of doing the Brighton Fringe, specifically for performers who are debuting shows. The free model, does it work in Brighton, if it's useful in Brighton, or if it's better to go with a paid option. We also talked about whether it's worth getting a PR person involved in a festival that's a little bit smaller than Edinburgh. And we got into quite detailed discussions about the future of the Brighton Fringe, the current state of how to get word of mouth and traffic and audiences, and also what he would like to see more of in terms of creativity in marketing and publicity for different shows. Really quickly, if you're in Brighton or live anywhere near Brighton and can come down, I'm doing a show. It is called Buddhism and Cats. It is on at the Carolina Brunswick. It's on the 5th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 24th, 25th, 26th and 27th of the month. It's completely free and it starts at 7:45. If you are coming down, do come say hi, say you heard about it through the podcast. I'd love to know if anyone comes down or if it's useful for me to publicise my shows like this. So please do let me know. If you can't support me or the show in that way, feel free to share the link with a friend who is doing the Brighton Fringe or with someone who is thinking about doing the Brighton Fringe. We covered a lot of stuff about the future of it and where it's going, so I think it's going to be evergreen for a little while longer anyway. Or if you want to support the show in a more financial way, we have a PayPal button on the website, which you can find at simoncaine.co.uk/asktheindustrypodcast. Any donation you can give would be really helpful. 5, 10, 20 quid, whatever you think these are worth. If you only are listening to one podcast, put a monetary value on what you thought it was worth and send me that. That's perfectly acceptable. If you're listening to all of these and you're 15 episodes in and you want to attribute, 1, 2, 3 quid a podcast times 15 by 3, 45 quid, send it my way. That'd be lovely. That'd be really helpful. But genuinely, any and all donations are amazing and helpful. And keep the show going. If you want to follow along, the show notes can be found at simoncaine.co.uk/asktheindustrypodcast. The show notes, I should explain what they are, because some people are saying that they've only just found out about them and they're phenomenally useful for them, but they just wish they'd known about them earlier. The show notes are essentially me writing out every question that was asked with a timestamp, so you can jump back and forth to have a look at just that question or that section of questions. Any mentions that the guest has for anything involved in that answer are linked there. So if there's a comedian mentioned, if there's a show mentioned, if there's a venue mentioned, or anything of that sort, it's all there. So they take me a long time. So if you actually want to use them and you find them helpful, or you haven't used them before and you think, oh, that sounds like it might be quite useful to browse, Simon Caine, simoncaine.co.uk/Ask the Industry Podcast. You can also find a link to it in the show description on your pod player of choice. Without any more delays, this is Julian Caddy.
Well, the advantages for performers would be that Brighton Fringe is a good deal cheaper than Edinburgh. Increasingly over the years, Edinburgh has become a place where people expect to lose, or at least spend, an enormous a life-changing sum of money to do a 3-week run at Edinburgh Fringe. The costs are multiple, and the venues charge a lot because it costs them a lot. I've been a venue manager in Edinburgh for a long time, so I know the reasons why. Brighton is different in that you don't tend to perform as long. Instead of 3 weeks, it may be 3 days. It tends to be between 1 and 5 or 6 days that people mostly perform at Brighton Fringe. That's not to say it's not increasing, and I'm sure cost pressures and industry pressures may indicate that people will have to do longer runs in Brighton too soon. But at the moment, anyway, Brighton it's very close to London. You don't have to spend the night here to perform here, so accommodation is cheaper. Anyway, but you'd be staying in your own place if you're London based. You don't have to perform as long for as long a run. There are a lot of the same and indeed different reviewers coming down to Brighton too. So if you're coming to do a show at Brighton Fringe, you'll see some quite familiar Fringe reviewers who are here anyway. People like Broadway Baby, Fringe Review, Fringe Guru, the likes of Chortle, and most of the online Fringe media are covering Brighton. So regardless if you're wanting to go to Edinburgh or not, for people going to Edinburgh, it's great to have your review for your current show to put on your flyers for Edinburgh. But equally, if you're not, you haven't got money to do 2 Fringes in 1 year, but you're wanting to get your name out there in terms of good independent reviews, you've got your reviews without so much hassle that may come with it. From an arts industry perspective, we've been spending a lot of time building connections with other festivals and other venues, theatre, comedy, music, and so on. And we have an arts industry showcase in the first week called Window, which again it's not like Edinburgh. We have our own selection procedure for certain shows. This is actually only 10, but if you are doing your show in the first week, then you're likely to have a larger number of arts industry professionals coming to see the show because of that week. But even if you're not in the first week, there are plenty still coming down anyway.
So when you say connections with other festivals, I remember last year when you were doing the Bring It On event in Edinburgh, you were talking about I can't remember what it was called, but there was a Fringe like umbrella company that linked you with some places in Europe as well as some more localized ones in the UK. How does that work in terms of do you book out? So if I was a performer and I wanted to do a week here and a week in one of the other festivals and a week somewhere else, do I book it all through you, or do I book it all through the umbrella company?
It's the World Fringe Alliance, which is a loose affiliation of fringe festivals from Adelaide, Perth, the National Arts Festival of South Africa, Prague, Amsterdam, Brighton, Edinburgh, New York, and Hollywood. They comprise they're some of the largest arts festivals out there in the English-speaking world anyway. I'd include Amsterdam and Prague in those because they're largely, although Amsterdam slightly less so, English-speaking festivals. They all run their own programming. I don't do any of the programming. However, if a show does well at Brighton in terms of awards or reviews and so on, then it stands it in good stead at those other festivals. We have award-winning shows which and also the artistic director of, say, Amsterdam Fringe, Anneke Janssen, comes to Brighton looking for shows to take to Amsterdam. So that's something that can come as a result of doing Brighton Fringe. Also, I'm on the jury for the National Arts Festival of South Africa, and so I'm part of the judging panels for that festival, independent of Brighton Fringe being an independent, an open access arts festival, so I don't judge in Brighton. But if something does well in South Africa, then they get favourable arrangements coming here. Same thing for Amsterdam, where I'm also on the jury there. And we have an award up in Edinburgh too. So it's growing. Everything comes down to funding, however, that's always the issue.
Yeah, and you also do free fringe as well as paid fringe down here. Do you think the free fringe model works down here as well as it does in, say, Edinburgh, where a lot of performers, especially in comedy, are doing free shows because it works out, they can do the show even if they don't break even? Do you think, based around the shape and the layout of the city and where all the venues are and how See, so for example, I don't live in Brighton. You don't live in Brighton either. But so for me to come down and fly, I basically have to take a day off work, come down a few hours early, and spend time trying to get people off the street. I mean, do you think it works still for like the same way Edinburgh does, where you kind of immerse yourself in the arts centre, or is it a little bit different in terms of your marketing strategy?
Brighton is quite different from Edinburgh insofar as the fact, insofar as it's not taking place during a holiday. It's not in August, it's May, which is it tends to be a working month, but for the 2 bank holiday weekends and for families, there's half term in the final week. So generally speaking, people are working. A lot of the audience is local here. About 67% of the audience is local. That is to say, 67% of the audience are probably working during the day as well. So Monday to Friday, during the day, it's quite quiet. The shows tend to be evenings and weekends, and then bank holiday during the days as well. If you have kids shows, then it's a bit more flexible than that. So in terms of you going down and flyering, it tends to work after work time and at weekends.
And there's I've done a bit of research into this, but there's a lot of stringent rules in terms of flying down here because, correct me if I'm wrong,
You're wrong.
I'm really worried now. As performers, we are subcontracted by the Brighton Fringe to be flyers temporarily during the festival. Is that right?
You are entitled to flyer anywhere in Brighton and Hove with a pass.
Okay.
So with the Brighton Fringe participants pass, you can do flyering anytime. Not any time. I think it's up to. I'm not sure what the exact times are, but I think it may be up to maybe 8 o'clock in the evening. You can flyer anywhere within the city limits. You have to flyer responsibly, obviously, and if you cause problems in terms of dumping things, then that is that will come back into our faces and probably into yours as a result as well. Otherwise, yes, you are right. It is very, very heavily controlled, but with the pass, which is what you pay for when you do your registration, that you get to be able to do that as part of your registration.
So does that only count on the days you're performing, or does it count throughout the whole Fringe?
Anytime.
Okay.
Anytime that you have a participant's pass. So when you come down to Brighton, you go to the participants' hub, which is at the Mesmerist, the Mesmerist pub in the lanes. There's a participants' hub in there. And you can pick up your pass and other information.
And going forward, like with the Brighton Fringe, do you want to encourage more free or paid shows?
I don't mind. It's not for me to. It's not for me to decide what people do in terms of paid or not paid for. The Fringe works for different people for different reasons, and it's important that there are different ways of entry. People may have a work in progress show that they want to do. They've got zero budget, and so they're wanting to put it out there in front of an audience. So a free show works for them. If you're doing a show which you want to be more able to be sure that you're going to be making a bit more money, then you make it a paid for show. It's not quite so rigid as it is up in Edinburgh. You could do a free show in this venue, which is Carolina Brunswick. You could do a free show just as much as you could do a paid one. The Laughing Horse productions are a combination of paid and free, rather than just being free as they are in Edinburgh.
I remember, because when I was signing up, I'm in this venue, and when I was signing up to Alex Petty, Laughing Horse, I was talking to him a little bit back and forth on email, basically saying, should I do it paid? Should I do it free? Like, what's the... You know what I mean? Because in Edinburgh, his is pretty much all free. So I didn't quite understand why the structure worked down here for a paid show in a potentially free venue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's different economies for different performers. If you have a slightly better worked show, you have a good audience already, or good following, then a paid for gig might be better for you. My understanding is that and this could be, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
It costs more with Laughing Horse to do a paid for show than it does for a free show. Is that right?
I think so. I'm not doing a paid for show, but I would imagine it would.
Yeah, I think that the fees are slightly higher.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what more you get for that, but there may well be things.
I think they sign you into the ticketing system, which is kind of one you have to be on if you're doing a paid show. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you get any additional like PR help or publicity help or any of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. If you, in terms of, I mean, like I said, or like we were talking about before we started, neither of us live in Brighton, and as a performer, I'm finding it a little bit hard to get into the spirit of it. Like so with Edinburgh, you know, the 2 weeks before, I'm like, oh, are my train's sorted? Are my accommodation sorted? You know, where's the nearest Tesco's to my accommodation? You know, all that stuff. Whereas when I'm down here, it's more, you know, what's the latest I can leave from work and get down here and then fly and then do the show and then what can I get back in time to sleep for work the next, all that kind of stuff. Do you have any like advice as, I mean, I know you've run venues before and you've been involved in the promoting side. Do you have any advice from what you've seen over the years for people who maybe sort of are going to struggle to come down and do their promotion or do their marketing as well as the show? And because I was talking to someone in your office about opportunities for posters around places, and there are companies that will do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, if you want to do it more yourself, what would be your advice for people who want to do their own marketing?
Well, as it is with everything, you get out of it what you put in. If you're unable to take time off from work before going to see the show, fair enough. That's the parameters around which you need to work. However, if you're able to take a day off or a couple of days off around the show or in advance of or on the day of your show, then I would definitely recommend doing it to get an understanding of the festival. It's important to be here and to spend some time engaging with performers, engaging with public at specific venues, whether it be in the pubs or down at the Spiegel tent or in the Warren. There are a growing number of very Edinburgh Fringe style venues within Brighton Fringe now, and they are there for the taking in terms of audiences. The audience in Brighton is very adventurous. It's not like Edinburgh in that there's a very strong Big Four centric behaviour, because it's easy to pick up one brochure which only contains 800 shows rather than pick up one which contains 3,500. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Where would those be? Sorry, you said there's like Edinburgh centric kind of venues.
Oh well, the Spiegel tent in Brighton, down on the Old Steine near the pier, which has the Bosco tent, and it has a Spiegel tent and a large festival bar, and then the Warren, which is just literally 100 yards down the road from the Carolina Brunswick, just to the north side of St Peter's Church. It will be a venue called the Warren, which will contain two large venues. I think it's a 200-odd seater and a 70 or 80 seater, again with a big beer garden attached as well. They're the two of the largest programmed venues at the festival. There are also others, including the Marlborough, the Basement, the Jukebox, and the Old Market, and there are plenty more in between. Comedia, of course. Gosh, how could I forget Comedia? So, and if I've forgotten someone else, then I'll probably probably get assaulted. But all of the Laughing Horse venues as well. The Temple Bar, oh goodness, it's too. I had an early morning this morning. There are four okay. Laughing Horse venues, including this one.
All, yeah. I mean, I'm interested personally, as the guy who runs the Brighton Fringe. Do you ever get a little bit, not upset, but maybe a bit frustrated with getting compared to something like Edinburgh?
Not really. No, I think that it's the sincerest form of flattery. I think Brighton Fringe is a fringe festival. The original Fringe festival is Edinburgh, and the fact that people decide to have their faith in Brighton Fringe before and also instead of going to Edinburgh is a great thing. And I think to my mind, a very strong attachment to Edinburgh and a very strong fringe ecosystem. It makes it it actually much it's a very good thing. I'm extremely excited that there are festivals in Buxton, Oxford, Henley, Ludlow, Bath, Milton Keynes, Bedford. Every town and city seems to have a fringe festival. That's a very, very good thing. The thing that frustrates me is that we, in every breath, and this coming from London, it doesn't even cross into your radar. Within Brighton, at least, Brighton Fringe is constantly compared to Brighton Festival, which is the equivalent of Edinburgh Fringe being compared to Edinburgh International Festival, which is a totally different event, but has a much longer pedigree within the city, and is a great asset for the city. Don't get me wrong, but they're different things. It's a bit like comparing a fine dining restaurant with something which is maybe a little bit more for the common people, which is, I suppose, what the Fringe is.
Right. Do you think those have sprung up because people aren't all able to go and take part in Edinburgh for or not able to travel? So from here, I mean, for me, it's 4 hours from London. Mm-hmm. So from Brighton, I don't even want to imagine how long it takes to get up there if you're taking the train, let alone
about
if you're
6 hours.
6 hours. Wow. Okay.
Well, getting across London, the 1 hour to get to London. So
do you think the festivals around the country, the sort of new blood festivals, should we say? I mean, I know they're not that new, but are they springing up because people are seeing a viable financial reason for getting people to come to that city, or getting people in that city to go out and take part in the arts? Or do you think it's more they can't get up to Edinburgh, and as a result that it's better to do a localised version?
I think you've answered your own question. I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think there is a case, and a growing one, that Edinburgh is reaching a level which is potentially unsustainable in terms of, and people have been saying this for years, by the way, in terms of size and cost, that something does have to give somewhere, and so there is always that. But the success of Edinburgh breeds lots and lots of copycats all around the world. 230 international fringe festivals around the world, with I think there's something like 8 million people go to fringe festivals around the world. 2 million of which are going to Edinburgh, by the way. But it's a significant amount going to Edinburgh, but elsewhere in the world there is this growing ecosystem, and it's vital. I think in order to revitalise young people's interest in the arts, I think the Fringe Festival marketplace is, more vital than I can possibly say, in terms of, in this hard world of no arts funding, and getting worse in the coming years, we're going to see an explosion, I think, of fringes, because the genteel environment of going to something which is comfortably funded, I think those days are dwindling.
So you mean like paid art centres and nice venues are maybe getting closed down? Or
I think that's going to be an inevitability. I think that there will be always ways of making sure that these permanent venues and so on can continue through whatever funding they can find, and I'm sure there will always be some funding available, but always is a long time. But I compare the Fringe to the cockroaches of the arts world. When the funding apocalypse happens, the cockroaches will always survive.
I understand what you mean. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, even Ideas Tap, the website,
closing down.
Yeah, and it was gutting. It was a lot of RIP, posts going around on Facebook and Twitter and stuff. And it's really sad that something that perceivably that big, that's impacted so many people, could just not get any more funding.
Yeah, no, it's exactly an example of that. I'm sure there's other things at play in that one, but it is a good example of a bad thing.
In terms of word of mouth at Brighton, obviously in Edinburgh that is just key. Like, I mean, when we had Kate Copstick on, she said it was really important. Then the big boys came in. It was money talked, then money shout, and then it was money, or you don't have any audience. And now it's a case of you either have money to bring people in, or you have a good show to bring people in. And it's kind of like, I mean, there's less. It's not quite like that, but it's a bit of that split.
Mm-hmm.
In Brighton, if there's 67% of the audience who are locals, would you say that word of mouth is just as or more important down here?
The fact that Brighton Fringe is very local means that the word of mouth works best for the locals. So local performers tend to get the time, the lead in for the local audiences to see them. So if you're going to be coming to do Brighton Fringe, and you're about to do something like that tonight, I think, is to come and do some preview gigs to get your name out there in Brighton outside of the Fringe Festival period, so that locals do get to know who you are, so that you can get, little mini showcase gigs, open mic spots, that kind of thing within Brighton, outside of Fringe time. In terms of getting the word on the street, otherwise it's quite difficult because the runs are quite short. Kate Copstick's quite right in both of the things she's saying, but in Brighton you don't have 3 weeks. You might be doing it in 2 days. How are you going to get a word on the street, even in a place like Brighton, which is and a festival like Brighton, which is a tenth of the size of Edinburgh? It's not possible. If you had 50, even if you had 50 people, and actually if you did have 50 people in this audience, that would be considered a massively wonderful success for your first night. But 50 people going out for the following day, if you're just doing 2 days or 3 days, then it does limit it.
What is the average numbers of audience for a Brighton Fringe show? Do you know those?
There isn't really an easy number to state, because there's always an exception to every rule, and there's different size venues. There isn't really an average size audience in Edinburgh either. That allegedly it's 7 or 9 or something ridiculous, but it's absurd to have something to say something like that, because you've got Pleasance Grand or whatever with 800 odd people, and then you've got tiny little spaces which might have fewer as well. Generally speaking, I'd probably say Edinburgh and Brighton audience is probably similar, and I'd say an average audience might be between 20 and 50.
No, it's music to my ears to hear you say that, because if the amount of people that ask that question and get just a simple 7, like that kind of rubbish answer, and if you know anything about the law of mathematics, that's exactly what happens. It's like if you took 20 people off the street, there'd be like an average height between them. But if you took everyone in the world, you've got like someone really small, maybe 1 meter high or whatever, and 7 meter high, the average is 4 or whatever it is. Obviously the two at the extremes are going to ruin the averages. The only reason I asked it was because the way you said, if you got 50 people in here and this room can hold 60, that'd be quite a successful first night. Do you think it's a good idea for comedians to have like a success based around a number of people in a room, or is there like other measures that Brighton Fringe can offer?
Well, of course, it's not just about the audiences. If you have a full house of audiences of just general public versus no one coming to see your show, but very influential producers or promoters or journalists come and see the show instead and enjoy it, then you will have had you may have more of a legacy as a result. If Steve Bennett came to see your show and said it was the best thing he's ever seen in his life, and he writes you a feature in Chortle, but it was just him and you in the audience, then that's a successful night. Definitely.
It's not going to happen.
Just you wait. You never know.
No, I don't think Steve would ever use that phrase, just because I think that I like whenever I read his reviews, I think he writes it so you can't get a quote out of it. So I think for him to say it's the best thing he's ever seen, it would just be too much of an ego trip for one person to take.
Fair
especially
enough.
a comedian.
Fair enough.
So being such a a smaller festival than maybe most people are, or some people are used to, do you think it's worth investing in a PR person?
Again, it depends on how long you're doing the show for, what your intentions are with that show, and what your budget is. I would say that if you can afford it, then yes. And I wouldn't just say that the PR person should just be doing Brighton. It should be somebody who's helping promote you in many things that you might already be doing. If you're doing gigs in London as well as Brighton, then it might be worthwhile having a PR person anyway. Brighton tends to be, for a lot of people, a few days as part of a tour, rather than being the final destination of people's performances. So PR could be forming part of that mix. Increasingly, what I would like, I mean, if I want to see what do I want Brighton Fringe to become in the next 10 years, it would be for Brighton to be more of a destination festival where people are doing at least a week, to give it more of a festival feeling. It's disheartening, I suppose, for someone doing a show at a festival where it doesn't feel like everyone's experiencing the same thing. One of the golden things about Edinburgh and other festivals, maybe perhaps a little bit more like Adelaide or Avignon in France, is a bit like that too. And some of the other international festivals like Prague or Amsterdam or South Africa National Arts Festival. Everyone you're with is there for the duration, and you're going through something together. Brighton's quite spread out, and with the short runs, people are sort of dipping in and out of it. So the length, which is 4 weeks, is quite notional. So in terms of getting a PR, which is taking me back to the question you asked me, any extra external help can be useful, because flyering is less, I'm saying this carefully, flyering is less important in Brighton than it is in Edinburgh. For example, if you're doing a show on a Tuesday evening, places to flyer that are acknowledged, i.e. New Road, which is Fringe City, are less frequented, and people walking down the street are just walking down the street, and they're not necessarily there for Brighton Fringe.
Do you think people are planning their trip or their evening's entertainment far in advance, or do you think, because like in Edinburgh, I mean, I get a spreadsheet out and I'm like, bam, 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 these are the things I'm going to. It sounds like if you're, there's a lot of stuff that could come into play. So if you're at work, you've had a bad day, or there's a deadline that's hit and you leave late and you just don't want to go and see that show, but you were like, oh, I would have gone if I hadn't have had a... So it feels like there's a lot of other variables that you're not even able to control down here.
Yeah, there are a significant amount of people taking the Brighton Fringe brochure, putting circles around shows, and deciding to book them. They may not be the people walking down the street, though. They'll be doing that in the comfort of their own home.
Right.
They may not be influenceable. The decision they're making is in advance. We will have a Brighton Fringe app on people's phones, so they'll be able to do it on their phones as well as being through the brochure or on the website. In terms of your the length of your run, as I've said before, it is difficult to influence people by that one medium.
As someone who's only done Edinburgh, this is my first Brighton Fringe.
Yeah.
Flyering seems like well, I don't like flyering in the sense of I don't like the process. I don't mind doing it, but it's a case of a sort of must need to do because everyone else does it, and to me that automatically feels like I should be finding something else to do. Do you know what I mean? And to hear that flyering might not, because I feel like it might badger people down here more than it would do in Edinburgh, where the people who are there, locals, are aware of August just being a flyering zone in the city centre. Whereas here, it feels like everyone's getting on with their day-to-day lives. And so to stand at a street corner and go, I've got a show, by the way, you know, they might have kids, they might have a deadline, they might be working a night shift, you know, they don't want that. So are there any other methods that you could maybe use to not manipulate but to influence people to come and see a show that don't involve flyering?
Well, social media, the PR side. I would say being a little bit chummy with other similar performers like you, who have perhaps audiences which might be similar to yours, so you can cross-promote each other. That's quite a useful way of doing things in Brighton. Different to traditional just handing out flyers in the street, going to other particular venues which may be doing similar things to you, including your own venue as well, going downstairs into the bar, saying there's a show going on upstairs, is flyering of sorts, but it's more engaging than just handing out a leaflet. Because the Warren is just down the road here, and the Spiegel tent another half mile further down the road as well. There you have your audiences who are coming into those venues specifically for the Fringe. So flyering in the traditional sense can happen, and it's exit flyering outside venues as people come out. It's doing it as they're going in, queuing up for the box office or whatever. But it's also engaging with people. I have this year he's back again. There's a chap called Stuart Lightbody, who is a psychological illusionist and a card magician. He gets his audiences just by doing tricks, close magic, and so on, and illusion work in pubs, and that's how he sells out. Obviously, not everyone can do that sort of thing, but it is about engaging people, because in a sense, as a spoken word or comedy performer, your tool is your voice, your persona, and that's what gets them to engage with you. So if that process begins, and it's bloody hard work, it needs to begin, as early as possible in that cycle, and so that's why it's good to come down a few days before. Right,
and meet up with actually people. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I feel like that can work at most Fringe festivals, but I feel like here, where it's much more personable, is that fair to say?
It is, yeah. I never like or recommend just standing on a street corner handing out leaflets. The wastage is massive. People, I know myself, if I happen to pick up a leaflet from someone as they're just standing on the street corner, my interest in that is going to be fleeting at best. And most often I will take it, fold it if it's an A5, or just simply put it in my pocket. I don't tend to throw them away straight away, but they certainly don't come out of my pocket. If the person is engaged with me and talked to me about their show in a way, or they've collared me in a nice way, not an annoying way, and have entertained me just a little fraction of a second, that's the moment. That's what stays with me. Is that flyering, or is that something else? That's face-to-face sales, I suppose. So, and that often is what frightens people too. But it is the most effective, and this is Edinburgh particularly, but I ran venues for a long, long time up there, and the effect of good flyering is stratospheric. And I'd say the same thing can happen in Brighton, but it's just picking the right places to be able to do it.
And almost, I mean, I wouldn't say picking the right people on the street, because you can't prejudge people like that. Anyone could be interested in it. But I know what you're saying about the wastage in particular. That always makes me feel really uncomfortable in terms of I did a blog post a while ago trying to help comedians, learn how, what they're looking for if they've never ordered flyers before. So the quality of the paper, double-sided, print-sided, all that kind of stuff. And loads of people were like, but how many should I print? And I'm like, how many days are you doing? How many people are in your production? How many, take it more seriously than just, if I order 5,000, I save 20 quid. But you are going to waste probably 1,000 of those. And is it really worth it to save that? You're damaging the environment. I mean, in terms of Brighton's environmental policy, do you do recycling here for Fringe performers?
We recycle all of the materials that we produce, and we recommend that performers do the same. We can't control what everyone does. We make sure that everything that we produce is sustainable. In terms of handing out of flyers in the street or getting how many to print, I would say exactly the same thing to them. There's no point having 5,000 flyers if they're all going to stay in a box. You need to plan how to hand them out, and saving you 20 quid at print may actually cost you more if you're going to be spending either time or money employing someone to hand them out at the other end.
Are you allowed to employ flyers? Because if you're subcontracted by the Brighton Fringe, does that mean we would have to get a licence for them?
Well, whoever's handing out the flyers would need to have the pass. So the people doing the flyering, in most cases, are people who are part of the production in some way. And if you've contracted someone to do the flyering for you on your behalf, then essentially they become a de facto freelance part of your company, and you'll give them a flying pass, a participant's pass to be able to do that.
What happens if they don't have a pass when they get like say a police officer or whatever questions if they should be flyering or not?
Then they could be liable for an on-the-spot fine if they're doing that. But most often, I would say in every case that I've encountered, they just get told not to do it and get themselves go and get themselves a pass from the Fringe office. It would be if they're repeat offenders, and if they're being very obnoxious, then you're likely to get into trouble.
Okay. I know. I was gonna just slightly go back a step, because I know I know your point about the group feeling that you get at like other festivals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've networked a bit with other people who are doing the Brighton Fringe this year, either as their first or their second or third or whatever it would be. And although social media makes it easier for us to message, we feel a bit detached from each other. Like we can't just meet up because we're still all working during the day in the lead up to it and stuff. Mm-hmm. I was also going to comment about local media. In Edinburgh, pretty much every media outlet then focuses on the Fringe, mm-hmm. and a bomb could hit, and unless there's a show attached to it, I feel like they would second guess covering it. But here, it feels like media outlets are still like they might be more interested in news. Like it might be a good avenue to have a news story worthiness to your show, if that makes sense, than just asking for a review. Would that be fair to say?
No. I think that the Argus covers. The Argus is the main newspaper for Brighton and Hove, and they do extensive reviews in their paper and online. The Brighton and Hove Independent are one of our partners as well, which is a free sheet, which is weekly. They also do lots of reviews. The latest seven, they're called. They're a weekly magazine, a little bit like The List, I suppose, but a free magazine. It's a bit strange. One side is a listings magazine, and if you flip it the other way up, it's a property magazine. Right. So it's a little bit of a one thing pays for the other, and plainly it's the property that pay for the rest. And there are other magazines such as Viva Brighton, XYZ. Brighton is a city for little publications about events and music particularly.
So listings are more interesting down here than news stories?
Of course you can have news stories, but if it's a seagull stole my false, nose, then that's a fun little news story, I suppose. But generally speaking, there are reviewers out there looking for reviews, looking for shows to review. Yeah.
No, I meant just because as another way of maybe getting publicity, it might be an interesting avenue to try and have a publicity stunt or a news story that could go into.
Of course, yeah. But the Argus is the Argus is famous for its very strange. What are they called? The billboards that go next to the sales outside the shops.
Yeah, headline type thing.
Headlines, yeah.
Okay. So social media is that taking a bigger part in publicity then for you guys, or for audiences, or for both?
I think Brighton's no different from anywhere else in that respect. It's, I suppose, if there isn't so much of an on-the-street vibe, there is a virtual vibe in Brighton, and you can be getting the word out there to a lot of people via social media. There is a danger with social media in that people who look at social media tend to be people who are wanting to get stuff out of social media rather than that they want to get information out of social media. There's a lot of navel gazing, I think, that goes on within these things, and that's Edinburgh as much as it is in Brighton, I think. So in terms of the community of comedians or the community of performers generally, social media is a great way to get in touch with each other. In terms of getting in touch with the general public, it is patchy, I would say, and I would say that that's the case for Edinburgh as well. But in terms of getting news stories out there to journalists and from journalists, quirky little messages that might go more viral, then that's the place for it. Something that just says, "Come and see my show. It's great. Yay! Here's a link." Isn't really going to make great headway unless it's to your mum.
My mum won't come.
No. Well,
it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. Because the reason I'm asking is because last year in Edinburgh, they had a different hashtag to normal. They had hashtag unboring, and or they were kind of pushing that quite a bit. And I was wondering if that is something that, does the Brighton Fringe monitor hashtags? Do they encourage people to use certain conversation grouping tools?
Mm-hmm. We do. I forget what our hashtag is. It probably BF2015.
Okay.
Or something along those lines. There is a hashtag Brighton Fringe as well. There are obviously plenty of people searching for those sorts of hashtags. Brighton comedy, those keywords as well. But I'm not an expert. I unfortunately have to admit, but I do spend a lot of time tweeting. But I'm not terribly good at knowing what the right hashtag is.
Okay, I'll look it up and
look it up.
Show notes. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
Dear listener,
and follow Julian, obviously.
Obviously, at Julian Caddy.
There you go. It'll be linked. Don't worry.
That's right.
So, because I work in social media marketing, I should point that out to you now. So for me, it's always interesting how people and organisations are using different platforms for that. You said you tweet a lot. Do you favour Twitter then personally, or with the Fringe itself?
I don't know if I'm a typical social media user. I don't know, but maybe I am. But the way I see Twitter over Facebook is I'm not talking to my friends necessarily. I'm talking to... I have more Twitter followers than I do friends on Facebook, which may not be normal, I don't know. But I've got maybe nearly 2,000 Twitter followers or something. And they are people in the industry or in the media more than... And in fact... a lot more than anything like my family or my friends, maybe family and friends maybe following. So when I'm writing things on Twitter, it's more of a public broadcast. I find when it comes to Facebook, it's more of a personal things. I also do the public thing too, because that might be interesting to my friends. But Facebook has been more personal. However, that said, I'm not terribly choosy over and above someone trying to sell me something on either of those things, who I link up with. Facebook probably more so than Twitter. I'll accept. Well, I'd have to unfollow them, wouldn't I? No, I'd have to follow them first. This is me going through my mental my mental map. No, if someone follows me on Twitter, then that's it. They're following me on Twitter. I could block them if they're obnoxious. That's the way it goes. But in terms of making friends on Facebook, I don't tend to accept friends that I don't know.
Okay,
Does
that's
that make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I'm the same. I've got more followers on Twitter than I have friends on Facebook. I think it depends on what you're using it for. So if you like, for me, I'm the same as you. So maybe we're not typical, or we are. We'll never know until we ask enough people.
Well, I suppose that the good thing about social media, in the same way that the good thing about the Fringe is that you use it the way you need to use it. People may just constantly be using Twitter to talk to their mates, and that's great, and that's useful for them in that way. Other people may use things in different ways, like Southern Rail are using Twitter to do customer service, and others as well. So best way of doing customer service though, Twitter though. You just have to say at British Gas, you're crap. You'll probably get a reply from British Gas going, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you've got a problem. It's much more effective than calling them up.
It's me who has to write those replies. So
is it?
Please
Yeah.
don't encourage you.
Okay.
I don't work for British Gas, but at the moment I work for a certain brand who, people spend all day writing, your shit to me, and I have to go, well, I know they are, but I can't say that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of awkward. But I know what you mean. It's better in the terms of you don't have to sit there on the phone waiting for them. And sometimes they ring you back, which is great.
Yeah, I think it's I think in terms of customer service provision, I think Twitter is potentially, if it's used properly, potentially a game changer, I think, in terms of that. We're going off topic a little bit.
We are a little bit, yeah. I was going to ask if you had any, because in London there are a lot of Twitter feeds specifically for like London based like pop-ups and events and things like that. Are there any in Brighton that, they don't have like a website or a publication, but they're dedicated to interesting things around the city that people like performers might want to outreach to, or audience members might want to look up for, little hot tips and things?
Well, the best person to talk to about that would be Rosie Blackwell-Sutton, who's our marketing coordinator, who handles all of the social media. There are undoubtedly those sorts of things, but I would say, generally speaking, if you want to hear the word on the street about what's going on in Brighton Fringe, to follow Brighton Fringe, or to follow Julian Caddy, mainly for the main messages that are going out there. And I tend to retweet if someone asks me to, but as I said earlier, don't be annoying.
Do you get a lot of time to go and see shows during the Fringe yourself?
I try and make a point to see as much as I possibly can during the Fringe. It comes around once a year, and it's something that you spend your whole life working towards. And if I was to lock myself up in a little room and not be seeing anything, I think it would be a little bit depressing.
Yeah, no, I just imagine it'd be really hard for you because there's more to do during that month than the rest of the year, or potentially because you've got loads of stuff being thrown at you.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, there's a lot more media work that I need to do during the Fringe time. A lot of entertainment of our commercial partners and funding partners, family coming down, friends coming down, just generally showing my face around the place. But otherwise, it's an opportunity to enjoy it. I need to do something I enjoy, and if the thing I do that I most enjoy, which is experiencing and enjoying watching live performance, isn't available, then I'd probably stop.
Fair enough. Yeah. And in terms of your narrative on your Twitter feed, or not your Twitter feed, the Brighton Fringe Twitter feed, does that come down to like who you guys have seen internally and you want to promote, or is it like a structured, we need to give equal say to every single show that's on?
Brighton Fringe doesn't retweet as a policy a show just because it's on.
Right.
I might, but it would depend. But if it's something specific about a show that's interesting, if a show has got a special offer tonight, If there is interesting information about that show that could be interesting, rather than more than just it just being on, then we can probably retweet it, depending on circumstances. I have to put caveats into everything I say, but generally speaking, promoting one show over the other is not something we can do. But saying Buddhism for cats,
Buddhism and cats,
and cats has just won a special award. Is a nice thing to say.
Yes.
Or Buddhism and cats is on at the Caroline in Brunswick, and is it a free show?
It's a free show.
Okay, so it's now a paid for show because it's so successful.
I'm using these as quotes on the poster,
exactly,
right? They just like it would just say Julian Caddy, Buddhism and Cats has won an award. It won't say what award.
That's right.
It would just have that you plugged
just
it.
as I said that, due to the success of Buddhism and Cats, it having sold out its free show, it's now doing performances for £20.
And it very well may do if Steve Bennett comes down and says it's the
best show he's ever seen.
Exactly. I think that would definitely sell out some stuff.
Yeah.
So, okay. Follow Brighton Fringe and look out for those updates about my show. And follow Julian Caddy. You said the future of the Fringe, you want more people to stay here or be around Brighton for a longer period of time. What, in the next sort of maybe short term, 1-2 years, but 5-6 years, are you planning on trying to initiate to make that possible?
This all comes down to money. But I want Brighton Fringe to be much more visible in the public consciousness, visible in terms of physical stuff happening. I want a great big parade, if I can, at the beginning of the festival in the night time. I want a big fireworks display. I want nighttime Fringe City, like an equivalent of the Royal Mile, but at night. I want plenty of just noise around it, which means people will be, if we're doing all of that, then the participants are going to want to be part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If the Fringe is this exciting place to be, regardless of it being holiday time or not, people are going to go, no, that's great, that's really important. This is making a big statement. It's only a week of my life, but it's going to be one which is going to be able to change my career. And if I'm not going to be doing Edinburgh, then and it's going to be Edinburgh and it's going to be Brighton instead, then it's an investment of my money too.
Sort of a build it and they'll come kind of thing.
I think so. I mean, that's what a Fringe is, really. I mean, I every year when I was running my venues in Edinburgh, it is a suck it and see. You go, oh, shall I do Edinburgh College of Art this year with my 6 theatres? Okay, let's do it. And then you program it. And so if you make this thing available and you make enough noise about it, then yeah, if you work at it, obviously, it's not quite if you build it, they will come. It's if you build it and adequately promote it, then they will come. Yes.
Yeah. So would you ever do a sponsored, there are awards in Edinburgh that are like sponsored by certain things. Dave's Leicester Comedy Festival, for example, is sponsored obviously by Dave. Would you ever do a sponsorship deal then to try and keep the funding going, or do you want to keep it as independent as or free from that as possible?
No, we utterly rely on sponsorship.
Okay.
We've got a significant partnership with Citroën Cars. If you look through the brochure, you'll see the partners page contains lots and lots and lots of logos. Over half of our income needs to be from advertising and sponsorship as a central organisation. For the registration fees cover barely a third of the income that we require. So with that in mind, we are utterly reliant on that. We get very little public funding. We get basically £10,000 from the council each year to support what we do, which is very gratefully received, but it doesn't go anywhere close to running our organisation, also covering the overheads thereof.
How do you pick the sponsors then? Because obviously you've got to make sure they represent the core values of the festival and what it's doing. And Citroën, for example, are a multinational corporation. Do you ever take localised funding or local sponsorships? What's the process for that?
Well, if I'm honest, you get what you can. We don't get involved in any things like cigarettes or cigarette papers and that sort of thing. If the car company wants to support us, then we don't just say, car company, support us. We'll want it to be something which is a bit more creative. We have Grolsch, for example, the beer, doing a visual arts installation in Fringe City. So that's an interesting thing. Citroën cars are doing a percussion show inside and outside the cars. So there's a duo called Bang On who were semi-finalists, I think, in Britain's Got Talent a few years ago. They're doing a percussion show inside and outside their new Citroën Cactus car.
Right.
So it's something which is lending itself to performance rather than just shoving a logo on something and saying, yeah, here it is. That doesn't really work for me. I think that we should be as creative with our partnerships as we are with our artists.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's awesome. And if you had one bit of advice for performers who maybe... So, I mean... Okay, let's. I'm going to split it. If you had one bit of advice for local performers who are doing the Brighton Fringe, and one advice for people who are maybe coming from overseas or coming from around the country, taking part in the Brighton Fringe, what would that be that they should definitely do to either make their show a success or to improve the chances of getting local coverage or audiences coming in?
Start as early as possible, I would say. Get to know the people that you're wanting to contact in a non-creepy, non-stalky kind of way. The main thing is to engage with the people within Brighton, if you possibly can, and get your story out there as soon as you possibly can. Little preview pieces work quite nicely, and there are plenty of local media who are doing those sorts of things. And there is a media list available on the Brighton Fringe website and by contacting the Brighton Fringe team. So make use of that list and do your homework about who you need to talk to, because it's no good just turning up that day with 100 flyers and say, right, quickly I've got to get downstairs and I've got to get people who are just come in for a pint to come and see my show. You're not going to get anywhere. So in the same way as you treat anything you're serious about, you need to do proper planning. Treat it like a business. That's what I say to people. Treat your show like a business. It's something that you don't want to just do once. You want to be able to be in business for your career, for your life. So if you are that serious about your business and about your life, then you should be investing of yourself. Not necessarily of your money. It might not necessarily cost physical money, but it does take time, emotional investment as much as financial.
That was Julian. I had a lot of fun talking to him. He's a really knowledgeable guy about fringe festivals, the state of the arts world in general, and just has a really well-rounded view on the circuit and the audiences that you're going to get down here. And it was really fun to go into detail with that because, like I said in the pod, as someone who doesn't live in Brighton and doesn't understand the ecosystem down here, it was great to sort of just get someone else who gets it from that perspective. He doesn't live in London, so he doesn't live in Brighton, he lives in London. So it was great for him to be able to understand what I mean by not feeling part of that ecosystem and that community that you maybe get in a festival like Edinburgh. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like I said, I'm doing a show. It's at the Carolina Brunswick. It's at 7:45. It's on the 5th 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 24th, 25th, 26th and 27th of May in the Brighton Fringe. So if you want to come to that, that'd be amazing. It's completely free, as I think I've said about 4 times, or pay what you want on the way out. It's called Buddhism and Cats. If you want to support me, come on down, bring a few friends, that'd be amazing, and it would really help me out, because I could be spending this time flyering or not flying, as he said might not be the best method of doing it, but I am not. I'm editing a podcast for everyone. If you can't support me that way, or support the show that way, or you want to support me in another way, please share the link to the podcast with someone else. This could either be the iTunes link, the Stitcher link, or the direct link to the streaming option on the website, which you can find at simoncaine.co.uk/Ask the Industry Podcast. If you really love this and you would like to support the show in a more monetary way, you can go to the website, again, simoncaine.co.uk, and there is a PayPal button very prominently positioned at the top of the page, as well as on all of the pages for the podcast. So if you would like to donate X amount of money to help me keep making these, put a value on what you thought this podcast and all the other ones you've listened to are worth. $1, $2, $3, $4, £5 a podcast, times by the number of podcasts you've listened to and enjoyed. Fire that money over to me. It really helps me out. For example, I'm down here in Brighton for the afternoon, literally just podcasting with Julian and Jill Edwards, who will be out later on in the month. Finally, you can join the Facebook group, which is called RC Industry Podcast. So just search for that in there. In there, I announce, people who are coming on the show and who are the new guests that are like signing up and stuff. Recently, we had Ian Coyle, who is the commissioning editor for UK TV, and Dave sign up, which means we now have the commissioning editor for the BBC, UK TV, Dave, as well as I'm talking to another one that I don't want to talk about just yet, but those will all be out later on in the year. I'm very excited about that. If you join up, you'll get exclusive information about that. Also, thank you so much for the support. I know I say this all the time, but I always want to make it very clear that I really appreciate it. We managed to get to number 2 in the business chart and number 27 in the careers chart. I moved us out of comedy because it felt more right for us to be in the business and careers chart, because that's what this podcast is about. And also it means I'm not competing with every BBC podcast out there that just dominates the top 100. We're in and out of the top 100 at the moment on those 2 charts, and I can't thank you enough. It's down to you. I have no media budget and no marketing budget for this. So thank you for the support. Thank you for the kind words. Please keep sharing. Please keep talking about it. Please keep joining up to the community and taking part in the conversations. And please keep donating. Really, really appreciate everything you're doing. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at thismademecool. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in about a week and a half's time. Bye.